Well, it's January the 2nd, so if you're lucky enough to be able to afford a holiday abroad this year, there are a number of new flight routes from Ireland opening up. And to tell us more, we're joined by Eoghan Corry, editor of Air and Travel magazine. So, Eoghan, where are the new routes going to?
Good morning, Audrey. That white sand between our toes and the blue warm sea awaits. There will be about 200 routes out of Dublin in the summer ahead, and we have 14 new routes from Dublin. There'll be 3 or 4 very interesting ones there. The Greek island of Kos, which was served by charter services until now, that's going to have scheduled services out of Dublin. We've got a few new to Sardinia. The boot, the very bottom of the heel of the boot of Italy is in there as well. And there are new routes from Cork and Shannon as well, and Belfast.
And Aer Lingus and Ryanair competing on some of them at this point too?
It's very interesting what happened. Aer Lingus announced 4 new routes, one very important one kicking in. The most of Aer Lingus will kick in May, and they will include Olbia in Sardinia, Kos and Brindisi, and they also have an interesting transatlantic to Cleveland. Then Ryanair were introducing 4 or 5 new routes in March, but what Ryanair did was they added 2 of the Aer Lingus routes. What does that mean for us? That means that there'll be a bit of competition on those, so you'll get much lower prices. Always for the first year of a new route, it takes that long for it to settle in the consumer mind. You'll get better prices than you would for cities that are more familiar to people. So that's very, very good news. We also have an interesting Tel Aviv service, first direct service to Israel by scheduled aircraft, and that's kicking in March as well from El Al.
Are people going abroad more often and for less time, Eoghan?
We've seen a little bit of the trend of that. When they're all going through the abacus at the moment in Dublin Airport. Ryanair will be announcing their annual figures. They'll be about 4% ahead of where they were in 2019, unusually for an airline. Dublin Airport, though, will be about 15% lower than we were in 2019. So while fewer passengers are going through, we see this trend where the average length of a holiday is lengthening. Not by much. It's gone up maybe by a day or a day and a half. But you go back to our parents' time, 2 weeks was the standard. Everybody went by charter. They stayed for 2 weeks. That came down to about 5 days as people travelled more. We've seen it lengthen ever so slightly. And what the surveys are picking up, like Tourism Ireland, very big year inbound as well, they're picking up that about 30% of people are still, this is internationally, are still nervous, a little bit nervous that COVID might come around to bite us again. And there's that uncertainty. So we will see summer 2023 not back at 2019 levels, around 85% of the levels that they were in 2019, because that uncertainty still hangs over travel.
And speaking of COVID, there are no direct flights to Ireland from China, but are any of the connecting countries checking for COVID status, vaccination status, given the scale of infection in China at the moment?
It's going to be a very important few days because the medical advice it's collated by Europe, by the ECDC. What we saw happen a couple of years ago was the ECDC advice was effectively abandoned by the member states. They all want their own way. There's a little bit of a hint that that's happening again because Italy, Spain and France have introduced restrictions on inbound passengers from China. Not major ones, things we were familiar with towards the end of the restrictions here, like PCR tests. It's very important if you're flying through Charles de Gaulle to China. We've a considerable Chinese community. If you're flying from China back to Ireland, if you're coming through Charles de Gaulle, you will need that test. Other countries like Frankfurt, you won't. But what will happen over the next few days is we'll have this conversation between the politicians who are more anxious about, more enthusiastic about restrictions, and the medical authorities who are not.
OK, Eoghan Corry, editor of Air and Travel magazine, many thanks.